So we could see that the US Pluto return is not only inflicting its powerful archetypal resonant energies internally, but also externally as well. We're seeing this play out here very powerfully with the Ukraine crisis now in play. So Ukraine is a developing country, which is ranked 74th in the Human Development Index. So it's a very poor country in Europe, along with Moldova. It suffers a very high poverty rate as well as severe corruption. What we see here now playing itself out, when we look at the black box, see the black box is going for a very positive state in January into a very negative stress state, especially in April, all the way throughout into the summer. So that's very interesting. When we look at this, we could see the correlation here as the Donbass War of 2022 with the Barbell Planetary Cycling Index, which what we covered earlier. We could see here that as the Crimea crisis occurred at the beginning of the Ukraine crisis, when Russia annexed Crimea, right? That in 2014 correlated to top, and now we're seeing this Donbass, right, where we're seeing occupied by pro-Russian rebels since 2014, and it's all coming to a head as we reach this trough in the planetary cyclic index. So, what we're looking at here is also an expression of that Pluto return, because if you take the US Pluto return, the astrocartography in local space, you could see that it goes right very close to Kiev, right through Donbass, right through Crimea. So that Pluto return, just taking that Pluto line, right, crossing right over. So that's one of the reasons in astrology, I'm not playing this down, saying it's not going to happen. Everything is fine. Putin is doing a head fake here. A lot of this has to do with the fact that there's been NATO expansion occurring, right? We've seen 14 new NATO members since Germany's reunification and the end of the Cold War in 1991. So we're seeing that NATO is expanding and moving further and further closer to Russia, right? Incorporating Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Croatia, Montenegro, North Macedonia. They've all become members. We have aspiring members. Ukraine is now an aspiring member to join NATO, right? And Sweden and Finland are also planning to join as well. We just got word that they're planning to join and become this huge military bloc, right? That to prevent Russian incursion inside of Europe. So we're basically seeing now that, for example, NATO's within striking distance of St. Petersburg. It's within 400 miles of striking Moscow. Now that basically these nations border on Russia. And this is the big issue. So we're going back here for a second. We're seeing how this expansion of NATO, right, that began in 2014, right? We saw from 1991, 2014, and then these additional Eastern European countries, right, bring the crisis to a point, right, where now, where we could see a potential war breakout in Europe. So this is all due to, we're seeing a deterioration of tensions, right? And we're seeing the imposition of sanctions on Russia from the Obama administration, the continuation, even more sanctions by Trump, and now Biden threatening even more sanctions, right? Biden threatening sanctions on Russia over cyber attacks, human rights violations, and Russian military buildup in the Ukraine, with Russia having 150,000 troops within striking distance of the Ukrainian border. So this is what we're seeing here all play out, and this particularly has to do with this Donbass region, which we're going to talk about in a second. So it's connected to the Barbell Planetary Cyclic Index. That index, as we get closer from 2014 to 2022, we're seeing more and more of these Eastern countries, these Eastern European countries becoming members, right? Moving closer and closer, moving where US and Western European forces under NATO are now, literally on the border of Russia. And this is Ukraine is the last straw in the sand. This is where the line in the sand that Putin is saying, I'm willing to invade Ukraine to prevent Ukraine from becoming a member. Ukraine was supposed to officially become a member sometime this year. They applied for it. They've been, and here's the problem. The rest of the country is looking at Biden saying, who is Russia to tell, right, any one of us or Ukraine who can become a member or not, right? Who's really in control of Europe, right? So if America says, well, yeah, Ukraine was doing the right thing. They were applying, they were in compliance, they were doing all the right things. There's a whole process to become part of NATO, and they were doing that. And all of a sudden, Putin says, no, you can't do that. That's it. We'll invade. We're going to force this issue in the United States. So it's backing off. What happens? Who's the real superpower here? That is the big issue. This is the Thucydides trap, which we're going to talk about in a moment next. So Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, and then Ukraine and Crimea in 2014. It's mass troops near Ukraine's border in what is suspected to be a preparation for a full-scale invasion. Those interventions offer clues about what President Putin may be thinking amid another buildup near Ukraine, and Russian military actions would likely be successful, but conditions now mean it would have high military and political costs due to the economic sanctions and other geopolitical factors that would follow, the ramifications, geopolitical ramifications that would follow. So this is the area in contention in particular, right? And this is the percentage of population identified as Russian. They speak Russian, they identify themselves as Russian, even though they live within Ukraine, and this is the area. These are the areas, right? So if Russia were to invade, it would invade up to, like, these are the areas where it would likely, in an invasion, consider overtaking and reabsorbing them back into the Russian Empire. Ukraine demographics and politics, you can see the same thing, right? During the 2010 Ukrainian presidential election, most people in Donbass voted for Viktor Yanukovych, who was removed from office in 2014, and Ukrainian revolution, and currently lives in exile in Russia. So the Russian president, right, the one they voted for, he's now in exile. He's in Russia. And basically what I believe the Russians are trying to do is split the country and restore, basically possibly create a Eastern Ukraine as a separate country, or possibly reabsorb them back into the Russian Empire. So that's really what's at stake here. They don't have sufficient forces to conquer the rest of Ukraine, right? So I think that's what's being negotiated right now, based on all my intelligence sources, that if the Russians were to go in, they're not going to take all of Ukraine. They're going to annex this part of Ukraine, more in line here, what we're seeing here, possibly just maybe this part, but certainly they're not looking at overtaking the entire country, possibly splitting the country down the center here. So we could see that type of scenario, and then listing that occupied area as separate independent republics. If we take the Pluto line again from the US Pluto return, we see, wow, it's going right through this area, right through this area. So it's not too far off. So the astrology is shouting very loudly. This is something we need to be paying attention to. So a focus attack in East Ukraine is seen as the most likely form of Russian action. And here's the thing: US military observers and experts believe the Kremlin is more likely to launch a more focused attack in the East and the Donbass region, where a war between the Ukrainian army and the Moscow armed separatists has gone on for nearly 8 years, with 14,000 people killed. This could be coupled with a hybrid measure designed to demoralize the Ukrainian population with a cyber shutdown and attacks on critical infrastructure. The US has warned Russia is preparing for a false flag operation inside separatist territory, which might be used as a pretext for war. A potential window for any offensive in Donbass would be after February 4th, when Putin is due to attend the opening of the Winter Olympics in Beijing and to meet the Chinese President Xi Jinping. The Winter Olympics closing ceremony is on February 20th at 7 p.m., and the military exercise in Belarus are due to be finished on the 20th of February. So the Russian military exercise in Belarus is due to be finished on the 20th of February. And the most obvious moment for an offensive operation would occur in that time period. So that would be sometime in the early morning hours of February 21st. And this is based on US military analysts, right? So US military analysts are skeptical Russia has sufficient soldiers for a large-scale full invasion of Ukraine. They don't have enough forces to overtake the entire country. So they believe a low-intensity conflict is more probable, likely that they have enough forces to basically conquer this part of Ukraine, right? If you take the Dnieper River, right? If we go back here, they could split the country in, right? This is like Western Ukraine, everything west of the river, they would take Eastern Ukraine. I mean, these are the scenarios. This is not exactly astrology, but what the astrology is shouting here with the Pluto return is that when we go into this Pluto return, this is all going to get activated, folks, right? This is all going to get activated. So that's important. Important to remember. So we're talking about a scenario. We don't know for sure if they're going to pull that trigger, but the astrology is showing right here. Look at the fact that during the time of the Pluto return, we had that Saturn, geocentric Saturn South node conjunct Pluto at the time of February 21st, which would be the exact time because the Russians need to act very quickly. Their window of moving into Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine, when it's at the height of winter, which would be the most opportune time, according to US military and naval analysts, would be in late February, early March. So this is the window. And in 2014, by the way, they invaded Crimea within hours after the closing games of the Olympics in 2014. So keep that in mind.
Be the first to hear the geopolitical and macroeconomic trends that will shape 2023 and affect your business, finances, and life. From research and analysis synthesized with a mundane and archetypal astrological perspective in the Global Outlook 2023 webinar with William Stickevers on January 22, 2023. All registrants will have access to the replay. Non-astrologers are welcome. No astrology knowledge is needed to benefit from this 7th annual forecast webinar. Register today at williamstickevers.com.